Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in to yet again another fantastic indie creator interview. It's your Cape Crusader Cody, and we're keeping it geekly with our new friend, Ben Humeniuk. We're here to break down an awesome comic. I had the chance to read it, and it was such an awesome experience. Brody Can't Be Broken.
Yes.
And, we're going to break it down. So a little play on words there. But before we do, Ben, I always like starting off with an introduction to who you are and how you got into creating comics. And I am really curious because you are the whole creative team for this, the writer, the colorist, the artist, the letterer. I mean, so how did you get into creating comics?
Man, for me, it was a combination of things that happened really in grade school, kind of getting into like Wizard magazine's era of dominance, talking about comics and their Toy Fair magazine they would do. I just kind of got bit by the bug during that time. And I would always draw, in my notebooks or to keep myself occupied. We're starting to realize there's some latent ADHD in our genetic stream with my family. So that was probably the way I stayed out of trouble in math class. But, Cody, I didn't really start trying to put my comics in front of people until I got to college. And I sought a job at our campus paper and did campus cartooning for about 2.5 years. That's where I had a readership and an editorial process.
Wow.
Really got some background for this, right? So it's been a passion ever since. And I've been lucky to find some footholds like with this book or with some previous ones. So it's been a real joy. But of course, it's a long run, right? We do this for a lifetime, and then we say thank you for the memories. So that's kind of a good thing.
So what were those comics like for you when you first started doing your first strip? I mean, because that's a whole different realm from doing like actual like books, like because you have to be able to tell that story in like a strip, and that almost seems like it's harder in itself. You only have a couple panels.
It's wild. I think so I'm 37, right? I came up out of the 90s, and I'm guessing we're kind of in the same age bracket, like generally
89.
speaking. Is that correct? Okay, fantastic. Yeah. So I cut my teeth on a lot of Calvin and Hobbes in my school library. Same with you.
Yep, in Garfield.
Okay. And Garfield, right? So you get that rhythm of four strips. But what happened for me was a lot of my work was single panel editorial cartoons for a while, and I would just illustrate whatever the editorial board was talking about in that given week's paper. But I was running short on credits my senior year. I'd taken some art classes. I took a figure drawing class that I actually benefited from, but was not okay for my major. And so I was kind of in a hard spot. So I went to one of the journalism advisors and said, can I do an independent study as a comic strip? Can I do a comic strip over a semester? You advise it, give feedback, and we get credit for that as an independent study. And he agreed, fortunately. And so that semester specifically, I made an A in comics, and I was like, all right, this is
best semester of the year, probably, huh?
Oh, it's wonderful. Good way to graduate. Good way to finish.
No, that is so, I mean, that's impressive too. I always love hearing, the first steps into it and the fact that you picked up a job, doing that. I remember being so excited for the newspaper on Sundays. I used to live out in the country, and that would be like my little, I would save those up like they were comic books, just like that whole little, dude, it was such an awesome experience. So when did you start breaking away from, working with individual panels like that in a strip and like start doing like more of a long form, like book style?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I had a bud who was in student publications with me, Ryan Brinson, and Ryan's in New York now, but he launched a digital magazine called Bleep that he was doing for a couple of years, a good run, about 5-7 year kind of thing where he'd do monthly issues and just interview creatives. But we connected over me doing like a monthly comic page for that. And so that kind of started spreading my narrative from like 4 panels to like multiple more. And I was like, well, maybe we can do like 9 panels and do like the Alan Moore thing right now, except with jokes. And then from there, that's kind of when the rise of Tumblr was happening. And a lot of independent people were posting comics there and taking advantage of the 10 picture limit to create essentially mini comics online, right? And so from there, I started to get into the kind of zine and mini comic scene, attending some independent shows, trying to get to know cartoonists in that world. And as I was working on that, I had a chance to connect with a gentleman from my area. I'm in the Houston, Texas region, and he was working with a nonprofit, and their job was to work with people in prison and take them through like an 11-step process, almost like an Alcoholics Anonymous 11-step situation. But in this case, for criminal offenders, they found their teenagers in the program just weren't into the curriculum, and they thought doing it as a comic would be appealing. So out of that connection, I drew my first graphic novel. I didn't write it, I just did the illustrations, but with Kirk, we basically created this 11-chapter story about a boy who comes up in a hard situation, has bad mentorship, makes some choices that affect his future, and then finds a way to turn it around and to make things right and find a better future. and that was really cool, and
Yeah.
for me, I'm a person of religious background, of faith, and the book went hand in hand in that also. So it was cool to kind of get into vulgar cartooning with that kind of mission in mind, and that sort of beneficent after effect, hopefully. And
Yeah.
so they still use the book in their program today, which is really cool.
And you're helping too. You're helping others who are in a less than stellar situation. Obviously, we don't know the total whatever happened with the crime, but you're helping them learn to work through that and hopefully understand those steps and become a reformed person by the end of it, right? Like that in itself is a gift that just keeps giving. Like that's awesome.
Well, and there's a huge conversation about criminal justice in America that I think is worth having, because our recidivism rate, the number of times that an offender would go back into the prison system, it's pretty high, and that's not good. That's not a sign of health. It's showing that a lot of what we're doing doesn't necessarily work. So to have solutions where someone can come out and not just be like someone with a past, but like someone with a future, I mean, that's a huge blessing. So we definitely love that. But I think I also see that in my everyday profession. I'm also a high school teacher. And so, one of the things I've seen throughout my comics career is that comics have such power to create and activate readers and then give them motivation to do something with that story, whether it's to be passionate about the medium or to have a different vantage point than they've had before because they've lived in a different character's shoes. And I mean, I'm sure that's a power you've experienced as you've gotten into indie comics yourself too. That's huge.
I think it's, giving them that piece of hope that they can relate to in a different medium. They can carry that rest of their life. And you're 100% right. The fact that, they keep reoffending, something's not working. So I just think it's so awesome that you had the opportunity to create something that, they can hold, they can read, and they can learn from. And like that's your history leading up to this was like, it's so impressive. And you don't, that's not just the gist of it. You've also like created books for children too, correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I had a chance to work with an educational publisher on a series that basically teaches kids how to do a science project in each book.
Oh, cool.
But we know that just giving you the instructions is fine, but if we can make it part of a story organically, that's better. And so the Magnificent Maker series that I got to do back in 2019 is basically a series of 4 sitcoms about these high school kids in an after-school makers club, and they get themselves into various situations and invent their way out of it. And so the reader can then walk along and replicate the invention that the characters show them how to do, and then that's all so resolves cool. with a laugh. Yeah, it's a good time.
So, I mean, man, how does it feel to be at this like part of your journey? Like when you first started in college doing those panels to be helping, prisoners reform themselves, helping children do science projects. That has to be surreal, right?
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times in comics you're looking forward to like the next opportunity, and it's because so much of the field is self-driven and it's freelance, and I think sometimes it's hard to stop and take stock of what you've gotten to do, especially when and I guess this is just being real, Cody, but looking back on work you've drawn, for instance, sometimes the older stuff looks a little rougher than the current stuff. And so I think your encouragement is really helpful to me in this moment to think about that.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes I just look back on old work and it's easy to see the flaws, and to rejoice in what was good is probably a healthy way to do that. So I don't know, man. Are you like a secret therapist? Is that part of the benefit of being on Keeping It Geekly?
Hey, I'm just good at talking. That's all we're here for. We have Ariel
Plus.
Bykowski. Sorry if I butchered that. Throwing a party
you got it right.
in chat.
Yes.
Hey, I usually suck with pronunciations. Me and Ben earlier, I'm like, hey, you got to tell me how to pronounce that last name because Google pronunciation is doing me dirty.
Absolutely. Ariel is one of my high school students right now. She's a fantastic poet, and she's in my creative writing class. And so thank you for spending some time tonight, Ariel. That's awesome.
Yeah, that is so cool. So, I mean, now, you're working on Brody Can't Be Broken. This is for a little bit more of, it's still the younger audience, but a little bit more adult themed, correct?
Yeah, it's something that would kind of fit in the same tone as like a Marvel film where it's got action, it's got intensity, it concerns characters who are teens or older. And so, I'm comfortable with my, 9-year-old and 7-year-old reading the book, but I think the people who'd enjoy it most would be high school and older.
And man, that has to be so awesome to have children who can take advantage of your reading as well. I'm a father myself, and I'm like, at the end of this interview, I need to get my hands on that science book. Like they would love that. Like,
oh yeah, we'd love to hook you up. Yeah, man. I don't know. My kids are all into Dog Man right now, so I've got my book, and they're like, "No, excuse me, I'm going to take some time with Cat."
And then what's the other one? The cat. It's Dog Man and Cat Boy, right? Or
yeah,
there's
Dog
a
Man
cat
and
version.
Cat Kid.
Cat Kid, yes. My kids love that so much.
Yes. Yeah. Have you read those, by the way?
Yes, they're good. They are good.
They're so good. Like, better than you would expect. You're like, oh, Dave Pilkey's playing with literature. So, yeah, it's great. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Well, they say that reading comics is like at a higher skill level than like reading like you know what I mean? Like in school, like you want to encourage your children to read it because they're reading at like a higher grade level with comics than they are at their current subject. Because like the literature that writers put in their scripts, like it's often at a higher level than just reading a traditional, like, you know, a sixth grader book, for example.
Oh, for sure. You think about Stan Lee, he had ambitions to be a great American novelist and never, you know, actually did his novel, but he was writing in a kind of Shakespeare influenced way with rare words. I mean, there were absolutely kids reading his stuff coming up that got exposed to more unusual vocabulary that they could then lock in their brains as a result. So yeah, absolutely. The tradition continues.
So, you know, I had the opportunity to read this. I absolutely loved it. We were talking backstage, and I cannot praise it enough. Everyone that is watching, it is available to be purchased today from your local comic book shop. Real quick, right here is a link to order it from bandofbards.com. Be sure to either way, you know, order it from Bands, order it from your local comic book shop. We'll talk about the importance of that in just a little bit. But man, we got to talk a little bit more about Brody. So this character in particular, the protagonist, I just love how he just keeps swinging. He just keeps going. And he literally can't be broken. We were talking backstage, and I said it was almost like an injustice to compare him to Goku. Like, for me, it was more like a Rock Lee. Like, just because, like, you know, I pictured that the Gaara fight, right, when he drops the weights and it just gets real. And I'm like, dude, this is getting hyped.
A lot of the book was born out of kind of trying to do some of those tropes from shonen manga or anime, right? Where you've got this big fight. In my mind, Brody had a lot of adventures previously, but this was like a major boss battle, right? And so he needed to step up to the plate. And the thing about the character is his abilities are primarily defensive, right? Like, he can't powerfully blow someone through a wall. He can't levitate them. He can't outmuscle them. All he can do is really protect himself. And where he can use that ability to save other people from harm, his job is really to be kind of a first responder. You know, in this situation, he's got to stop a big bad dude from blowing stuff up, and he just keeps getting swatted out of the way. So it was fun to put him in that situation and see, you know, can your resilience be more than just your abilities, right? Is there something more to you at the end of the day than just like a, so to speak, power or gift? And that was the hope, at least.
Oh, and I think you nailed it perfectly. So I got to ask, you know, the art in this is gorgeous. The writing is just as beautiful. Like, what came first for you, the chicken or the egg?
You know, in terms of like creating the story, or in terms of like which skill kind of got leaned on?
Creating the story. I mean, did you like come up with like maybe the concept for Brody, like in an art like session, or did you have the story just like in your mind?
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. The story came pretty organically. I had been looking at an indie anthology of kind of shonen type stories, and I was like, oh, this would be so dope to do something like this, and got pretty quick like sketches in my mind. I was like, oh wait, hold up, this could be the shape of the story. But honestly, the art did not come until I started pitching it, right? Like, I had the concept, here's the breakdown, here's the log line, here's the general plot, and then had some kind of rough images of what the characters looked like. But honestly, I think I found my process, and this is different for cartoonists, right? Some cartoonists are very visually driven first, but I think my process is kind of like plot script first, and then what the characters look like kind of emerges out of that. Bregghammer kind of ended up looking like more of a like Marvel 60s baddie, a little bit Jack Kirby-esque, not by design, but I think just because that was the stew in my brain. Whereas I wanted Brody and Amanda, the protagonists, to look more like modern characters who are wearing, you know, something like athletic garb or some sort of tactical clothing. It had a uniform aspect to it, but it also gave them flexibility in the capacity to maneuver. A little bit like, this is kind of a stretch, but you remember how Brian Hitch worked on Stormwatch comics before he did like The Authority and all that? He was cribbing from Star Trek. For some of the Stormwatch costumes, like even like the shoulder quilting you'd see in like 60s, you know, or 1990s.
I never knew that.
It's crazy to watch. And Hitch is a Star Trek head. He's like designed for the Chris Pine Star Trek movies and whatnot, which is kind of fun. But I think I had a little bit of Brian Hitch in mind, not the detail, not the realism. That stuff is high level, but a little bit of that modern vibe to, you know, what does a tactical person look like who's not like a colorful superhero, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And Bregghammer's a force in itself. You mentioned Marvel a lot, and when I was reading it, I kind of got the first Thor. I don't know whether it's called the World Destroyer or that big metal suit, and it just is completely just decimating everything. And I'm just like, dude, this guy is a monster. And you mentioned having shonen influence, but he's like Norse, like Nordic influence. If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So the big background behind the story is that kind of all of these ancient deities that we've read about in world history and literature, they were real, and they've gone by the wayside for reasons not yet disclosed. But at the end of this century, humanity's kind of getting past a lot of climate crises. We figured out fusion energy. We're able to pull that off. We've started to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And in the process, we accidentally woke up the gods, and they got pissed, and they're trying to put us back down. So Bregghammer is deliberately supposed to be modeled on an ancient Norse deity, kind of a demigod on purpose. And it's a weird thing to throw into what's ostensibly a science fiction story. But again, the mashup of genres seemed to make sense in my head, at least on one afternoon a year and a half ago. So no one has called shenanigans on it. So fingers crossed that it continues to be satisfying for for readers.
I love his weapon of choice. I don't know if there's a technical name for it, because it almost resembles a hammer, just with a huge ball, like a mace, like a monstrous mace.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
with like magical properties to it. Like it's. I just love this character. And you said this was a creation of like multiple influences, kind of just combined into one, correct?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. It's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B.
Yeah. So right now, I think would be a perfect segue. Let's go ahead. We're going to check out a little bit of the Band of Bards page and then hop over to Global Comics. And there's a couple pages that we can preview for free. So stay tuned, guys. Right here is the link. Be sure to check this out with us. If you're able to order it from Band of Bards, we would love to see that, or even from your local comic book shop. Ben, can you tell us the importance of doing both of those? Like, what does it mean to get it from your local comic book shop, for example?
Man, local comic shops keep comics alive in America. I mean, in the 1970s and 80s, when newsstand distribution was dying, a whole bunch of retailers said, we will buy these comics. We will say we don't have to return them, and we'll sell them to people. Your local retailer knows comics like the back of their hand. They know the kind of stuff that you would love to read. They're like a human recommendation engine. And when you go buy your comics from a comic shop, you support this effort to keep this art form really connected to readers, which is beautiful. So please, if you don't have an LCS, there are LCS Finder websites online. There are comic shops with digital outreach that you can use to get your books. My personal favorite is Space Cadets in Oak Ridge, North Houston, where I like to go. Jen King will take care of you. But yeah, that's huge. Now, Brody was, it might be tough to find in your local store. It's an unconventional size. It's a magazine format book. And so as a result, it's tougher to bag and board. And so some shops, may have ordered one copy, or if they had pre-orders from customers, fulfilled those. And if you can't find them in your local shop, Band of Bards does have a limited amount of copies on stock as well. You can get them directly from the publisher in that regard.
And how many pages again is this? I mean, because when I was reading it, I read it, my preview was double page. So I want to say it's like 60, 70 pages?
Yeah, it's a 64-page book. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And I mean, for $15, that is a big bang for your buck. These fully illustrated panels, and like you get lost in the details. I mean, your attention to detail with the environment is just chef kiss. Like, I love it. And it doesn't last long because it gets destroyed. Like, dude, just complete mayhem overall.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and just dive right in. I love this cover. Let's go ahead and kind of break this down a little bit. So we have our big baddie right here. We have Brody right in the middle, but who's this off to the side on the left?
Okay, you're talking, you make the L's, you figure out which way it is. Okay, so, yeah, on this side. So, on one hand, we've got Amanda, who is Brody's partner. She's the co-protagonist of the book. Even though her name is not in the title, she takes the story, and actually, she's the one who really rams home the theme of the book, which is what sacrifice looks like. But Amanda, she's a tactician. Her job is to guide Brody in combat, basically to call his shots, to call his battle tactics, and to make sure the operation goes well. She's getting intel from like their supervisors in the process. She's real brave, but the thing about Amanda is she came up in a cult that's dedicated to the worship of these demigods who are trying to put humanity down. The idea with her family was, if you can't beat them, join them. And Amanda's realized over time that like these demigods are abusive, like they don't care about humans. And so she's taken the courageous step of breaking away from that lifestyle, but she's still not accepted. People really are generally still suspicious of her. So she's got a lot to prove. She's really motivated to stop this creature, to show that she is trustworthy and that she does have the best interest of people in mind, and that she's not confined by what happened in her past, essentially.
I really like that. I mean, is there any deeper symbolism behind that? I mean, because that gives me a lot of like breaking the cycle vibes,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, I
I
love
think
that.
it's probably there's not her past isn't meant to suggest any sort of like physical or otherwise kind of harm, but
Hmm.
more so the psychological harm that comes from being in a religious environment that is meant to control you, right? Which I think we'd agree, if you're a religious person, that's probably not the kind of way your religion ought to go. So she really embodies that in a big way because she literally stands up to gods, and she herself has no abilities besides just being very, very intelligent. And in that respect, is probably modeled on my own dear wife, who is not an English person like me. She's a math person, and she's way smart, way
Yeah,
smart.
math is hard. Math is definitely one of those subjects
Hard.
I would not want to. So we have
No.
three individuals right here, and their uniforms kind of look similar. Are we seeing a little bit of a connection there?
Yeah, 100%. These are the bros. Guys and gals. Listen, it's a dumb name, and it's dumb on purpose because I love puns. But your biological reactive organisms. These are people who have been determined to have the capacity to stop demigods, and they've been genetically assisted to manifest the abilities to do so. So in the purple right there, that's Bro A. He's our team leader. He is incredibly strong, and he's got some things to learn about that in the future. Over on the side, in the green, you've got Bro B, and he's got the ability to manipulate matter in certain limited ways. And then over to the other side, you've got Bro C, and she's got the ability to kind of vibrate molecules and create concussion and propel herself.
Oh, that is
They have
so
pretty,
cool.
they're like more traditional offensive superhero power sets. Brody's really the one who just
Hmm.
can take a punch and then keep taking more punches and saying, okay, cool. But together, they're generally a cohesive unit. It's just Brody's the only one who can make it into the situation at the beginning of this story, though you see the other ones eventually.
And man, I just love the way the team is set up to kind of like each person has their own unique skill set to contribute. This is awesome. And so we have these other two individuals off to the side as well. They have just as important roles, right?
Yeah, yeah. So that's Dr. Reyes and Miss Saku, and they're basically the ones that coordinate the battle from the center. This all takes place in essentially territory in the future that's in the Middle East, and it's become the capital citadel of kind of a rebuilt humanity. So there's a lot of legend about how humanity starts maybe in the Fertile Crescent. Of course, there's a legendary side to that. We know a lot of humanity also starts in Africa as well, but we basically rebuild civilization there first. And so Dr. Reyes, she's in charge of the project to basically battle these demigods. She's like Shinji's dad in Evangelion.
Hmm.
Maybe not as like malicious, but definitely she's in charge of something and she's got great resources at her disposal. And then Miss Saku is there basically as the voice of negativity in the story. She's like, oh, they're going to destroy the city. Oh, Brody's going to fail. She's rooting against the main characters because we need that voice in the story too. We need
Hmm.
some doubt. Yeah.
Oh, that is awesome. And of course, this entire thing is done by just Ben himself. Holy crap. Holy crap. So, I love, like I said, your attention to detail within the environment and the world. Like, this is super gorgeous. Before we dive into the story anymore, though, I remember when I posted about our interview, someone mentioned to bring up a movie that you really liked that I guess might have been like close to Brody or like in the nature of this comic.
hmm Oh, interesting. Did they say what movie it was?
I forgot it was. It was like a laugh emoji, and they're like, you're gonna have to ask him about some sort of movie.
Oh my gosh, my goodness. Yeah, there's a little bit of that there. This is probably the part of the show. I know it's called Keeping It Geekly, but Cody, I'm a little bit too obsessed with Star Trek in general. And so those films are like my favorite ones. And I think starting a book in space above the planet Earth and zooming in is definitely like a very kind of Star Trek or maybe Doctor Who move, if that makes sense. So there's definitely a little bit of that there.
Okay. No. See, I always love, trying to throw those questions in because we get a little bit more of a personal, response or touch, So
for sure.
We of course see something's happening. There's some rumbling going on, but it's not the good type of rumbling you would expect. And all chaos. I just love this introduction. Just big lightning bolt, kaboom, and right away this guy is just out for blood.
Yes.
And I just love the fear right away. He goes to shoot his gun and then he's just grinning like, "Oh, you fool."
Yes, absolutely. This man likes to hurt people. Unfortunately, he's our bad guy. We need to hate him right away.
So I love this response, putting, the fear, the turmoil. Man, this guy is a force to be reckoned with. And right here, we were talking backstage about it. Just the right touch of blood, not too gory, but also, not too clean. And I think that is kind of a hard balance to maintain, right?
Yeah. Well, I think the big conflict here is that the story is about an invulnerable protagonist. Like, he can't easily be hurt. So it's going to get really boring really quick if you're like, well, he just keeps getting punched and nothing happens. We need to show you there are serious stakes to Bregghammer's presence. And if Brody fails, maybe he doesn't get harmed, but other people certainly will. And then, the violence does increase a little bit towards the end with some of the choices Brody makes. He himself, for the first time, experiences maybe the fear of bodily harm that he hasn't had in a while. So we want to set up early that that's a possibility so we can pay that off towards the end.
And man, the payoff is phenomenal. And I love right here, we get a little bit more behind the scenes. They're at their command, the Citadel command. And Brody's introduction, just swooping in from the helicopter, is just, that's about as heroic as it gets, right?
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, and I want you to see that, even though the other characters doubt that, right? Like, I like how Alan Moore classically puts a lot of ironic juxtaposition into his comics. He'll like show you one thing on the panel, but have dialogue that will indicate something's different about it. And so to have these traditionally heroic shots, but have doubt be spoken about the character and be spoken by the character, I think puts you in an interesting situation where this is cool. We want to root for him, but it's not a guarantee how this is going to go. We need to go in actively paying attention to this situation. I want the audience to be curious about that and maybe just a little bit off base for the story.
And so, man, it just right off the rip, I love this right here. You see these two kind of seeing eye to eye, and it is about to get crazy, smoldering. Let's talk a little bit about the character design. So when you were making Bregghammer, what influences were you looking for? Like, it looks like a Triceratops helmet, with the horns and the nose.
Yes, that's awesome. I think, and this is a little while ago, my idea was that this dude had literally killed dragons in the past, and he was wearing their teeth and their claws as like a mark of intimidation. I remember one time I played paintball with this dude who was so serious about it. He was a mentor of mine, and he put a laser sight on his paintball gun and camo taped it up, made it look really intense just for psychological freak out factor. And I figured Bregghammer, being savvy in war, because he's fought for thousands of years, would have the same mindset. He needs to have some sharp edges, because the other characters have these more kind of skin tight uniforms that just show that their bodies are athletic. We want Bregghammer to look a little more bulky, but also a little more sharp.
So from your previous works, is this the first time you drew anything like this action heavy?
Yeah, absolutely. The graphic novels with the science projects were obviously just kind of more straightforward character pieces. And I have a fantasy series for middle grade readers called Waking Life that I've done, and it's inspired by Little Nemo and Slumberland, the old Winsor McCay strip from back in the early 1900s. But even that one does have some action sequences that really pick up towards the later part of the story, but they don't get as gnarly as this. This is definitely more kind of grit in your teeth, sweat on the brow kind of stuff.
No, absolutely. And this gets, I just love the fight sequences, and that's all you guys get. If you're curious, you could check out the preview once more, but you're either going to have to buy the locked pages to unlock it. And that digital price is phenomenal. It's like what, $8.99, or get the comic. This is 60, what, it's 4 pages you said?
It's 64 pages, and honestly, this is the only time you're going to be able to get it in this big size, which we think best shows off the story. We're going to do another print on Brody in the future once the first run sells out, and on that one, it'll look a little bit more in traditional comics trim. But yeah, so if you want the big version, this is the time to get it. This is the one.
And it is gorgeous too. It's awesome to have kind of that unique size, right? It sets it aside from all the other comics, makes it pop out a little bit better on that shelf. And I think it looks gorgeous on a bookshelf too. I can't wait to get my copy in hand. Everyone that is watching, be sure to buy this. I was going to say pre-order, but I almost slipped up on that again.
No, good.
So Ben, I mean, what is next for you after this? Is this like a one shot, or are you looking at maybe continuing the story in the future? Like what's the future hold for you?
Yeah, on one hand, I would love to tell more stories in this world. If there's an audience for it, if my publisher knows they can make money by doing sequels, then we're going to do some more. We've got a whole arc about fighting these demigods that's been teed up here. The good thing about Brody is you can read it, and it's got a satisfying story. It's got an arc that resolves. And so no one's left with the bag. But if you want more, we'll do more. We've got a plan, and we know where it's going to go. In the meantime, the next thing on the plate for me, I've got a couple of short anthology stories coming up. Kalulu Invades Neverland is one that's done by Travis Gibb, who also is doing a Bard's comic. Coins of Judas is out this week. And so I'll be doing a story in there with my friend Stoney Williams. And then I've got a couple of other small anthology projects. But later this year, I am doing a one-shot with my colleague, Travis B. Hill. Travis is writing it. I'm drawing it. It's called Alas Goodbye. It's also from Band of Bards. This one is going to be a post-apocalyptic, kind of nightmarish thriller story, largely in black and white. It's going to be a 40-page one-shot. And it has kind of more of a horror edge to my art, if that makes sense. A little more of dread and kind of dark EC comic style inks. And I think that's going to be a fun, different way for people to see the kind of stuff I can do.
That is so awesome. I'm so excited for it. And I love seeing, you collaborate with people I know in the indie community. It's such a small world, and it's filled with such amazing people. And Ben, you have to be, one of my favorite guests to have spoken to, man. I love the story. I love your story leading up to it. I'm a big fan of like giving back and helping. And like right away, the comic that you did for the prison, the children's books you done, it's such an awesome thing you've created. And I think that leads me to my favorite part of the show, where I get to ask you a question where you can give a little bit of advice, maybe something where you could help people listening to Keeping It Geekly follow their dreams and passions. So with that being said, for anyone looking to really spice up their writing, maybe they're stuck writing one genre and they're trying to branch into different realms, maybe writing a comedy and they're trying to write a kid's novel or a younger audience novel. What advice would you have for them to kind of like vary up their writing to be able to achieve that?
Oh my gosh. I was talking about this with my creative writing students today. They do this for me. But and this may sound hokey, I don't know, but Cody, I think community is the biggest thing. If we have people that we let into our creative lives, like I'm sure for you, man, like you're not streaming in a vacuum. Like you've got people that you talk to who also do this, and you're sharing tips. And I think in the same way for people who write or create a cartoon, if you've got your friends who are speaking into your stuff and challenging you, then that can push you in a new direction where you can get unstuck. I love this. I've got a student named Pips, and I will tell Pips I said this live on air. But Pips was saying one of the best things a friend can do for you is they can encourage you to let your story go off course a little bit, because then there can be some disruption. And if there's some disruption, there can be some discovery, and your writing gets really fresh from that. So I'd say, even though writing and creating is a solitary act, you got to get people into it who can speak into it, who know it, who you can show your stuff to, they can show their stuff to you. And that creates some freshness and some vitality that you just don't get otherwise, honestly.
Yeah. You got to find someone to keep it real too, right? Like someone who's not afraid to like hurt your feeling, like in a constructive manner, like someone who's like, hey, this might not be your best. I know you could do better,
Are you comfortable if I ask you similarly, like, has that been true for you in your experience? I mean, your growth in streaming and Substack has been so huge this past year. So has that been helpful to have people speaking into that?
It's, it's one of those things where the podcast community, making leaps and bounds recently, but it, for a long time, it kind of felt like, I wouldn't say it was a competitive edge. It's just like people weren't warmed up to the idea of working with one another. So like creating that bridge has been kind of a hurdle for me, but we've been working really hard recently within like the last month or two to kind of like get together. I have this little group, like we DM each other, and every other day I try to get in there like, hey guys, what's something new that we're trying to do in terms of marketing? What's something that's working for you? Because feedback is so important. I was literally talking to my friend. He does interviewing for Comic Book Yeti, Byron, and I was like, yeah, yes, we were just talking, and I'm like, what if you have an idea and I have an idea, but we're missing something good, and that's in our grasp. We're just not thinking about it, because that's the beauty of it. Everybody I interview, I always ask feedback. How can I make this show better? Because even though I've done this 275 times, you might have something that I could do better that 274 people never considered. So feedback is so crucial. It's just sometimes it can be hard to find that group to do it with,
That's a good point. You need that trusted set, and that does take some time. Yeah, I get that. Yeah. And I'm glad you've got Byron, because the alternative is Jimmy Gasparo. Love you, Jimmy. Love you, Jimmy. Love you.
No, and I got so much love for both of them. So they put in so much work. But man, I'll be honest, I've had such an awesome idea, and I'll leak it a little bit. The podcast multiverse. So I want to do something where I'm doing a show and I have someone like glitch in, and they're like, hey, like I have a podcast. Be sure to check it out and like just drop it, because like. What better way, podcasts are the perfect audience. My audience is a perfect audience for another podcast that does comics,
Rising tide lifting all boats.
Thank you.
Oh,
and that's what this is all about. That's what my show is all about. If you're an indie comic creator, it doesn't matter your following. You could have one follower, You have 1,000 followers. Like, I don't care. The only thing I care about is you create comics. And 9 times out of 10, if you don't have a big following, it's hard. Sometimes it's harder for those little people to get on shows, to get their voice heard. And sometimes they have a book that is so good and all it needs is that push and it could explode. And that push is like, I had one, I'm usually booked out a month and a half. I had one indie creator. There was a month and a half where I didn't have anyone come on my show and I was trying. I was fishing for it so hard. Had one indie comic creator retweet my thing and that was the push I needed. And it skyrocketed. I had 100 people comment on, and I remember I spent I was I did one interview in November and then in February. That's how long that distance was. And I spent 5 days responding back because that's how bad I wanted this, and all it takes is that little push. And that's why Keeping It Geekly is the way it is. As long as you have a book and you have a desire to have your voice heard, I want to amplify that.
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for that, man, because it's helping me discover stuff that I hadn't seen previously, and I like that. Thank you for being someone who can elevate and give exposure to people who are trying to connect. I guess that's what this is about, like the creativity of making stories or telling stories or just communicating, podcasting. We just want to connect, right? And you're making that possible.
And you're it's right back at you. If it wasn't for you coming on the show, the next person listening wouldn't have found their next favorite comic. It's an endless circle. And look at you turning the wheel on me. Usually I'm the one asking questions, and it feels good to kind of break the mold a little bit.
I'm sorry. I'm a teacher at heart. I like the dialogue. That's my bad.
We have some chatter in YouTube. Interesting. Another comic writer who teaches creative writing. And then we have Ariel saying, that's my teacher. And just a lot of hype and everything in chat. Everyone, be sure to check this out at your local comic book shop or bandofbards.com. Make sure to get your copy ordered today, because this first edition is going to be the limited size order. So after that, you might not get this same comic. It might be a little bit different size. So be sure to hop in. Everyone watching, it has been a lovely Wednesday night. Hope you all have a beautiful night. But most importantly, guys, keep it geekly.